Okay, so now we're to the final session. If Andrew Zolli would come and join me. And we're going to do a couple of things. First of all, we're going to hand out white cards to everybody. They're coming down the aisles. And these aren't for you to put questions on to go up to us. What we're interested in is if you could write down on the card, before you leave, write down on the card the new idea that you've heard, some priority that you've understood, some remaining question that you have. Just write something down on these cards when they come to you, and hand them off to one of us before you leave, so that we can get a general sense of what people are gleaning from the discussion. And they're coming around to you now. Andrew Zolli co-wrote a really important book with his co-author called Resilience, Why Things Bounce Back. And he's been here with us all day and watching what's going on. He curates something called POPtech, so he's got a few observations. And while he and I are having a chat, you can start thinking about what it is you want to throw on the record. We'll send the mics up and down through the aisles, and Andrew's got an elaborate process to do that. I'm going to move to the lab. What happens if I do that? Are you going to hear me if I leave? You are. How fabulous. I love technology. And the other thing is that, Paul, you're going to work on the laptop and capture what people say, and you'll be able to see it up there. And we're going to have you out of here in 30 minutes, okay? So, Andrew.
Hi, Mary.
Andrew. Would you welcome, please, Andrew Zolli?
Hi, everybody. There is...
Hold it. Yeah.
There's so much aggregate intelligence, capacity, experience, wisdom, questions in this room. I'm going to keep my reflections mercifully brief. I hope Mary and I are going to listen to you and to try and weave together what we hear from you over the course of the next 30 minutes or so. But I thought I'd just say a couple of quick things about myself. My name's Andrew Zolli. I run an organization called POPtech. We bring together some of the world's best scientists and technologists, and engineers and designers, civic and social and ecological innovators to work together in a muddy boots, on-the-ground way on new approaches to some of the world's toughest problems. About 5 or 6 years ago, we started working very intently on issues of social and systemic resilience. And that's because the network that we aggregate, which includes community members and activists, all of those different kinds of folks, scientists, big organizations, small organizations. About 5 or 6 years ago, before the global financial crisis hit, something started to happen. The conversation began to shift away from risk mitigation, steering around storms, to something like risk adaptation. What do we do when they inevitably hit? And that was depressing for some people, deeply. It was a mournful moment, a moment where we thought, these things are actually going to happen now. Our models are beginning to, some of our worst models are beginning to come true. So that began for us a journey. We traveled around the world, from the coral reefs of Palau to the back streets of Palestine, Haiti, New Orleans, all over the planet, looking at the emerging heuristics, the principles of resilient systems, communities, organizations, societies, individuals. Broadly speaking, I just want to give you a couple of basic ideas before we dive in, because I think the opportunity here is for us to collectively identify some of those principles, but I just want to give you a little bit of a road trip report. First of all, you can imagine the resilience dialogue happening essentially along 3 axes. One of those axes is about the resilience of systems. And it's a conversation dominated by people thinking about economic, technological, social, ecological, complex systems that are not mediated by individual human decisions on a daily basis. Someone doesn't get up every day and push a button. It's the big aggregate, complex adaptive systems. At the other end of the spectrum, something we have not talked as much about is about our personal psychological, psychosocial resilience. What makes you resilient, me resilient? What makes our families resilient? The smallest units within which we operate societally, our immediate social networks. And there's deep and powerful and surprisingly optimistic new science there that shares with us and reveals to us that actually humanity is actually much more resilient than you might think. There's a terrific researcher named George Bonanno, who's up at Columbia, who studies the post-traumatic responses of communities who all go through a disruption. And what he discovered was that regardless of the disruptions, he studied people who were in the towers on 9/11, people who were in all of these other places experiencing these big shocks and disruptions. Somewhere between 1 and 2/3 of the folks who experienced the same shocks and disruptions seem to have innate resilience. So it's about how we enhance the resilience of the remaining, that remaining group. And in all of those kinds of systems and all of those kinds of circumstances, the vulnerable and damaged parts of our communities, our societies, our systems have to draw on the strength of the whole. So one of the things I wanted to say is that we've noticed this with Sandy, and we've seen it with some other things. These disruptions are enormous levelers. They literally set, right after the shock of, if you were in any of the most effective disruptions, you were living in a pre-civilizational context, right? And one of the most important and interesting things about that is that instantaneously puts us in a learning context with the rest of the world, because we've been living in a bubble of assumed protectedness for a long time, essentially sheathed in an assumption that we were not vulnerable. But people have been dealing with vulnerabilities, disruptions for long periods of time, and that means that we have a wonderful, huge, extant library, not just from New Orleans and Detroit and places in the United States, but all over the global South, where people have been dealing with this stuff for a long period of time, where they have socially reorganized in all kinds of amazing ways. One of the, I'll just share this one really quick anecdote. We convened a gathering in Reykjavik, Iceland, recently to explore what happened in Iceland, which is this tiny little, it's a country of 300,000 people. You could invite everybody who lives in Iceland to sleep on a couch in Brooklyn and have endless couches left over. But it was a perfect little laboratory. They went through a huge economic shock. Their stock market went from 9,000 to 14 overnight. And there were riots in the streets, and people were running up plans to literally leave the country. They were going to all board a cruise ship or something and leave. And they said, well, there's no one behind here to sue. Then, we'll all go we'll become migrants or immigrants. So something really amazing happened in the wake of that. First of all, they decided not to bail out their banks twice by popular referendum. They voted, no, this is really amazing. A group of artists and creative people in the society, because it's a huge creative community, led an effort that ultimately led to the rewriting of the Constitution from scratch. And today their growth rate's higher than the US, their unemployment rate's lower, because they did exactly the opposite of what we were insisting that they do, which was follow our model. And the reason I mention that story is that we have to, and no, it's hard, this is a sloppy conversation, because we got to deal with Nietzsche and specifics, and we want to introduce and parse the rhetoric of resilience, fragility, adaptation, mitigation, a whole bunch of vocabulary that means a whole bunch of things in a whole bunch of different contexts, and somehow get that big, comprehensive jazz band to move on to a new idiom of thinking about how we're going to build our societies. And that is a hard job. This is an amazing first step. This is foundational, what's happening in this room, because the network capacity that's being built today is going to serve the city for decades. The people that you've met that you didn't know, those relationships are going to be unbelievable. So
he's cueing you.
I'm cueing you. This is the long, yeah. Yeah.
So exactly. let's send people into the aisles, and Edith, you're going to work one, and who's working the other? Joel. Tell me what the numbers are for. If you have
okay, so here's how it's going to work.
say.
If you have something to say, raise your hand. One of these two fine people are going to actually find you with a microphone. So let's try it out. Someone raise their hand with something to say.
And let me just offer a suggestion that always brief is better, pithy is perfect, and that we're looking for principles. Okay, so go. Tell us who you are and what you've got to say.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes,
Karoliina
we can.
Salguero, Portside, New York, waterfront-based themed organization on a ship in Red Hook.
Can you hear, Karoliina? Can you hear? Okay, go.
Yeah, okay, so we want to work on some programs going forward. I want to throw some ideas out there to also see if we can get some partners and support. So we're interested in doing what I'm calling weather education, that there's information out that if it had been distributed and New Yorkers knew how to understand it, they would understand how to have gotten away to some extent from the surge. We're also very interested in social media. We use a lot of it. We could use actually some help improving some of our platforms if somebody wants to step up and help a nonprofit. But we're also looking at some old-fashioned media, which is radio. So we've had an interest in a long time in disseminating oral history and cultural tourism, but under an emergency basis, radio would have worked and will work going forward. And as many people point out, the communities most affected and at risk tend to be elderly, digitally disadvantaged for age or wealth or whatever, and so the radio will work for them. So anyone here does radio, we'd love to talk to them.
Karoliina, what are you giving us? A list of things you need? Is that what you're telling me?
We want to work on. We think it's important things for other people to look at. And then I also want to suggest that, am I only supposed to ask questions?
No, I just want to make sure that we get everybody in. So keep going. Talk fast. You're doing it.
Okay. The other thing is I'd like to suggest that working waterfront voices be included in things like this, as they're the people who build the ferries, run the ferries, remove the rubble, operate the ports, deliver the things. And so there's been a lot of focus citywide and here on small businesses, residences, and culture, but the physical stuff that you need to get in and you need to get out is actually handled by those people.
Right.
Can I extract the principle?
Before you do, we're going to post on mas.org all the presentations, all the bios on the panelists so that you can look them up. And Occupy Sandy came to me during a break and said they'll help us create a wiki. So any suggestions for people to come forward and offer things like Karoliina just came up with a bunch of things she needs. Let's start aggregating that and making sure who can offer what. I appreciate everybody's suggestions on what you can bring to continuing the discussion. And yes, extract a principle.
So the resilience principle there is that we fetishize the new, but it often rely on the old. If you look at the water system, it's gravity fed, it's natural, it doesn't actually have as many tweaks. It's not as complex as some other systems that often tend to failure. So it's one of the reasons it kept working.
No more fetishes? Out.
Hi, I'm Peg Sipe. I'm a community planner from New Jersey. I'm working in Monmouth County, which is the northern Jersey Shores communities, with the Affordable Housing Alliance, among other things. One of the issues that we're primarily focused on right now is interim housing for folks who have been displaced. I was at a conference similarly named at Monmouth University where Ed Blakey, am I getting his name right?
Ed Blakely.
Blakely, who has been very active in disaster management in New Orleans and in Australia, spoke of something they implemented in New Orleans called a soft second mortgage. It was a FEMA package, and it would enable people to get a mortgage that would provide new housing for them. And if they stayed, I think it was something like 3 years in that housing, it would be discounted significantly. If they stayed for 5 years,
So
it would be forgiven. It's called a soft second mortgage.
Where are the folks from New Orleans? Put your hands up. Who's here from New Orleans? Over there, over there, over here. Do you see them?
Yeah.
Beth, so make sure they can give you the details on what really happened with the second soft seconds.
Okay. But what I want to know is if there's anyone from FEMA here or HPD, can you raise your hands?
Anybody from HPD or FEMA?
Nobody?
Nobody here.
All right.
Watching at home.
Whoever's talking to FEMA or HPD or has the wherewithal to do that, please ask them to look at the soft second mortgage program.
Great. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Carrie, and I work for the city. And I heard a lot of great things today. But I think the thing I'm going to take away from this is that we need to work across boundaries and across barriers. And I think there's a lot of good work to be done, but we need to not work at cross purposes and really go up and down the chain and across horizontally. So I think awareness of barriers and boundaries and strategies for crossing those, I think, is really important.
That in this big piece of work that we wrote about in the book, everywhere we found societal resilience, we found a certain kind of leadership, which we called translational leadership. We took it from translational medicine. And it's the people who are the bridge builders. They're often not the square-jawed visionary. They're not Bloomberg and Cuomo advising a panel. They're the people who are 4, 5, 6 levels down who actually do the work of aggregating and connecting across horizontally within the networks. It's the empowered middle of the network, if you will.
One of the reasons we asked Andrew is that we felt it was important that someone like he, who's working on resilience globally, understands that the Sandy experience here and what we're continuing to learn about here in New York is of universal value, and that we share lots with other cities, lots to learn, lots to teach. Go ahead. Yes.
Yes. Walter Meyer, local office, landscape architecture. We've been working on the ground as community advocates since the hurricane in the Rockaways, in parallel to the CBOs, community-based organizations like Rockaway Waterfront Alliance, Graybeards, Rockaway Beach Surf Club, as well as NGOs who have come and helped, including Doctors Without Borders, Architects for Humanity, Cameron Sinclair, Michael McDonald in the resiliency system. I want to critique on the interrelationship between vertical and horizontal structures. Of course, the vertical we need, the top-down government, state, city. But if we can set up a turbocharge or supercharge flattening of hierarchy from the federal to the local, because there are inefficiencies in the middle, and which is, can we set up a CBO budget for future storm events to identify those voluntary resiliency groups? Some were on porches at a house, block captains. Some were the Rockaway Waterfront Alliance that went from a cultural facility to, for a month or two, a humanitarian facility, and we'll shift back to cultural. So if we can set up a full budget for that to supercharge the bottom.
Yeah, sort of I think what Ron was suggesting in terms of the way Kennedy approached it. Yes. Way at the back.
Hi, my name is Ken Gail. I do an environmental radio show on WBAI FM. Hi. And first of all, I want to thank MAS for the way this was done today, because there are so many ways this could have been done badly. And
oh, you sound like my mother. Great compliment.
This was done.
Could have been so much worse.
And you guys did a really, really great job. Not mediocre, but a really great job. I'm very impressed. You covered topics.
Thank you. Okay, Ken, let us have it. Let's have the other side now.
No, this is not a but. I'm actually wanting to take advantage of the brains and connections in this room, because there's been a lot of talk on the future and sustainability. We don't want a Sandy to happen again, and the way we use energy and the way the city does things and things like that. And I know the City Council is interested in improving the building code. Buildings are built to code and no better. And they want to improve it. They told me this at a hearing just a couple of weeks ago. Sandy has got government thinking in terms of climate change and climate chaos like they never did before. They've been deniers all these years, and suddenly they're going, nah, we can't deny this anymore. And we really have to take advantage of it. We can take advantage of it because they will listen to us finally. Our buildings, in New York City, our buildings put out most of the greenhouse gases. Buildings can be made to use 1/10 the energy they do now. There are architects who are doing that kind of stuff in New York City right now. All the buildings should be done that way. They could be retrofitted that way. And those of you who know buildings that need to be done or want, there are contacts throughout the room. I'll help in any way I can. But we can make our buildings better. We can make them use less energy. We can lead the nation in not contributing to climate chaos.
You go, boy. All right. Thank you. Thanks, Ken.
One principle that's woven through this discussion, because there are people here who work at local scales. There are people here who work at micro-local scales. There are people who work at regional scales and everything on upward. And one of the things that is a strong correlate of resilient systems that we saw over and over again is what we call, we reintroduced an older term from the 70s called an adhocracy. That actually it's lots of small, when you find resilience, what you find is bits of institutions, bits of policies, bits of ad hoc networks, bits of improvised pieces of technology, bits of community networks, all working together in a soup, right? It's a big stew. It's very, very hard to pierce, come up with the singular narrative of these three things happen in this order and the system bounce back. So building the right kinds of interconnectivities between all of those different levels. So some of it's what you describe and some of it's what you describe and onward. It's when you find resilience, what you find is that it's heavily dependent on trust and cooperation across scales. And one of the opportunities I think that's in this room is there are people at all of those scales in this room. And that is the relationships of beginning of trust.
Hi, my name is Daniel Vettori, and I lead up the digital placemaking program at Project for Public Spaces. And I also have been involved in Sandy through the Occupy wayfinding or crisis wayfinding work that we did around the Rockaways hubs. It's 2 points really, somewhat different from each other. One is that if we're talking about supporting adhocracies, working across silos, one of the things that is needed on a systemic level is to open up the city in terms of open data. Right now, EDC, a lot of different organizations, policies, GIS data, et cetera, it is severely locked down and closed and not transparent. And if we're going to be trying to collaborate with each other, we need to see what each other's doing, and we need to have open data stores that are easily accessible, and there needs to be funding to be able to support that, or there needs to be some organization that will be paid to sort of maintain that. Second point is more just a smaller one. When out in the Rockaway, one of the things that I heard was, a lot of the people were complaining about the FEMA situation because so much of the policy in the disaster recovery is around homeowners. And if we're now going to be having more hurricanes in densely populated areas, or like here, we need something to do with rental.
Yeah, it's a whole different scene. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the point about data. We get that again and again. You're absolutely right. And we had lots. Okay, there's a whole bunch of people in this group. Edith's going to be busy. Okay, Edith, let us have it.
Hi, Norman Ornelas. I'm an urban planning student at NYU Wagner. And I was just wondering what types of conversations are being had about trying to engage and build cooperation between community groups and the private sector, specifically real estate developers.
Yeah, we'll look to people in the crowd to respond to that. The question is, what kinds of conversations are starting to take place between community groups, governments, and particularly the private sector and developers? If somebody from the crowd wants to respond to that at some point, that'd be great. Joel? That's a long-going conversation. We'll keep having it. Yes, Joel, who you got?
My name's Andrew Faust. I'm a permaculture designer, bioregional educator in New York City. And part of what we're really working on and interested in that's apropos the conversation that's happening here is we're kind of those 6-layer down translator organisms who are helping with the idea of how do we begin to retrofit what is an inherently debauched and disastrous infrastructure, whether or not you're talking about disaster relief from hurricane events or the fact that we have 24 billion gallons of combined sewer overflows, air that's never once been in compliance with the Clean Air Act, and are held hostage to a centralized long-distance transportation economy and infrastructure.
Andrew, you got a principle for us
So
in there?
the principle here is as we retrofit, what we're looking for is something that is not a monoculture and is a polyculture, and something that is decentralized and is not homogenized, but is bioregionally adapted in its techniques, and at a protocol level recognizes that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Okay, there's quite a lot there. Probably hope you got some of that. Decentralized. Did you get it? There was a whole lot of things that Andrew, catch us later to make sure we get the words right, but there were a number of things that Andrew put forward there. Yeah.
Yeah, hi. I'm Bob Trentline. I'm retired. In the last 3 years, I've been working in Manhattan, getting community boards and elected officials to ask the Army Corps of Engineers to study storm surge barriers. What I find disappointing here is that everything you're talking about is good, and it's talking about what we should do in the long term. I think we're all in agreement in the long term, their storm surge barriers won't, by long term I'm talking about over 100 years. Long term storm surge barriers won't be the solution, but I think there are things that are under 100 years that we should be talking about, as well as what we're doing in the long term. The long term, a good part of us will be leaving New York City.
So maybe we got a little too
Well, we're all leaving New York City eventually.
I think that was his point, but presumably within 100 years.
Hi, I'm Wendy Brera. I'm the director of Green Map System, longtime sustainability and design activist. And just want to say we're not alone. You know, we're one tiny island, and there's coastal communities all over the world that are dealing with the same issues, and we need to bring in the best ideas and share the best back out and become much more open about where we learn from. Why aren't we talking to Havana, for example?
Right. I just want to ask, where are the IDEO people? We've had IDEO people here all day. And, oh, there's an IDEO person. Hang on, I don't know, can I break the system and go to IDEO? Are you amenable? IDEO folks have been monitoring the discussions all day, and I know they've got a few things. Throw them in there, Annette, quickly.
Yeah, hi, so my name is Annette. I was here with a team of people today, and we tried to attend as many of the sessions as we possibly could. We probably got to about 12, and I have 7 principles to offer of what we feel we heard from you. They're
Paul,
not comprehensive, but
He's
7 of them. Okay, so number 1, empower local communities and focus on decentralization. Heard a lot about neighbors and training and all that. Number 2, provide just enough structure to enable agile response. That's linked to the community response. 3, prepare to leverage existing tools and networks. That's existing networks such as Facebook, Amazon Relief, whatever there was, but also offline resources. And prepare to use them. 4, create channels for feedback and reassurance. So make sure that people know what they're doing is actually going into the right direction. Number 5, build dynamic systems that adapt flexibly to different periods of time. So be aware of whether this is before, right before, during, right after, or long after the storm. Number 6, design for the specific needs of New York's diverse communities. Language is really just the starting point here. And number 7, and this is probably kind of the title of the day, make recovery your preparation. Everything that happens after this is preparation for the next event, and yes, it will be October of this year.
Great, thank you, IDEO. Thanks, guys, thank you. Okay.
I'm Barbara Paley, and I'm talking on behalf of Urban Land Institute to answer some of the questions. And Andrew, you spoke for us about 6 years ago. You were great. Come back. We have several initiatives that I think would be very valuable for some people in the room. One is we have a Sandy task force that is both locally based and Washington based, where we would welcome collaborations. 2, we have a housing council here in New York that's very, people like Fred Harris of NYCHA, but local community groups are involved. We would welcome collaboration. And 3, we also have a new infrastructure council, which is looking at infrastructure both from IT, from bridges, many different things, and we would also welcome collaborations. You were talking about how we can mine data. The city has invested in, and the NYU POPtech houses the new Center for Urban Science and Progress, CUSP. And I think this is probably one of the best things that has happened in New York City this last year. We should definitely find ways to collaborate, utilize, and I can introduce you to Jerry Holton.
Yeah, we know them. I think they're here. I think CUSP is here. Anyway, carry on.
Fine. And the last, that's it. So I'm Barbara Paley, and you can talk to me afterwards, and I'll make those connections if you wish.
Thanks, Barbara. A couple more. I'm conscious that time is ticking. Yeah.
Yeah, very briefly. Howard Euro, Historic Districts Council Board of Directors. We're the citywide advocate for landmarks and historic districts, and we're interested in new ideas as far as protection of neighborhoods beyond the brick and mortar, and how these larger ideas link to our essential mission of protecting physical neighborhood heritage.
Yeah, great.
Mike McDonald, New York Resilience System. I think the principle of the New York Resilience System is to integrate all of the horizontal networks together into a system and to then link them into the hierarchical institutions so that we have the scale and sustainability of these hierarchical institutions, but with the sensitivity of being able to reach down and really deal with the problems in the neighborhoods. So one of the things that we're trying to do as a next step after this meeting is a meeting on Monday at the Center for Social Innovation to take these ideas and begin to process them into very specific projects that have concrete budgets, that are fundable under the recovery initiatives in an omnibus proposal that all fits together in a more in a synergistic package.
Thanks. Is Eli here from the Center for Social Innovation? He was here. What's the website for CSI? Where is he? It's not. I think it's socialinnovation.org, I think, which is the CSI that's hosting Michael. Go ahead.
You know, clearly a thought or just a reaction. It certainly is essential that we do exactly as you describe. We have silos of excellence. The of excellence part matters. There's a lot of capacity in those silos. And we know that it takes a long period of time to connect them horizontally and to build trusting relationships that cut across them. I think one of the things that, as we think about this, I want to just propose two ideas to you, one in reaction. One is that we have to be careful about not acting too quickly. I actually don't think we know everything. There are huge gaps in what we know, and these are complex systems, and I think there's a kind of Hippocratic oath when you interact with systems of gentle action. We talked about this yesterday. Just the kind of minimally intensive interactions to guide the system, to encourage the systems in the right directions, because the secondary and tertiary implications of those interventions often make the situation worse, as you heard about Lincoln Center housing, people from the Rockaways being completely disconnected from their home communities and from their normal rhythms and from any sense of social coherence, which is their right as citizens. So, anyway, just a thought.
No? Over here. Edith? No.
Carol B. Bell, Ashe Cultural Arts Center in New Orleans. Two things.
Hold that mic close, Carol.
Closer. Better?
Yeah.
Okay. The first one is that culture is pervasive. Remember that and remind each other of it when you don't remember it. And then the second thing is that this is an opportunity as much as it isn't a disaster, and to attempt to be catalytic as often as possible. Example, lots of money is going to be spent, lots of people are going to be hired, is to be mindful of under and unemployed folks and other people who are looking to advance themselves, and see how often you can manage to be able to advance your society as well as to be able to rebuild your city.
Okay. That was Carol B. Bell, who's with the Ashe Cultural Center in New Orleans. It's time to close. So I want to, you've got one who just can't bear, you've got to do it? Yeah, we have to. You got to say something. Go, Raju, you go for it, man.
I will make my remarks very brief so we can move on. My name is Sarah Baxendale. I am working as Sustainable Redevelopment Coordinator for Occupy Sandy. I work on Beach 113th in the Rockaways to restore a community center called Yana. You are never alone. I want to iterate to people here, if you have not come out to the Rockaways or come out to Staten Island and seen it for yourself, I really urge you to please do so. We are obviously a group of very brilliant people who have the ability to make amazing new models and design the most innovative solutions we have yet to accomplish as communities. But we cannot do it unless we participate in community. We cannot do it unless we share mutual aid with one another, and we cannot do it unless we respect the collective humanity of each other and our space inside of the ecology at large. So I just urge you to please get involved and participate, and to really leverage the best of your soul inside of this process. So thank you.
And I just have one last thing to say, and that is that we should all give a raucous thank you to Mary and to all of the MAS people.
Wait a sec. Not so fast, not so fast. There are many, many MAS staff here who have been working on this tirelessly, and as we said, we had these very noisy planning calls with almost 80 organizations. So those of you that persevered through those calls, and we tried to figure out what we were going to do, but there are two key staff members who really dug in on this project, and those are the people that I need you to acknowledge. Paul Kelterborn, up in the bill booth, and Courtney Smith. Courtney Smith. These are the two. They're the ones that rock the house. helped by the rest of us, Jessica and a number of others who ran around. So thank you to all of you. We really want this to be the first in several discussions. 2013, as you heard from Vin this morning, it's a pivotal year for New York. Perhaps the events of Sandy did us a bit of a favor. Perhaps they focused us in a particular kind of way, but we know that we have many, many challenges to the resilience here, economically, socially, environmentally. Sandy's part of it, but there are many, many things for us to all join together and work on, and MAS is all about that, about the livability and the resilience of the city, all 5 boroughs. So we thank you for taking a Saturday. I'm astonished you're all still here. Safe home. Thank you to the new school. We'll see you soon. Thank you, Andrew.